Welcome back, everybody. Now, having finished the last section, we are now going to move on to a new section of the course, and this section is all about answering the question, or in band descriptor terms, task response or task achievement. Now, if you want to score highly in this band descriptor category, you're going to need to focus on addressing the task requirements appropriately, accurately, and sufficiently. So one of the ways that we can do that is to have relevant and appropriate ideas. So this first lecture is going to be all about how to find ideas to create the content of your essay. I feel like finding ideas is a common anxiety among many candidates. It's one of the most common worries that my students bring to me. They tell me that they struggle to think of ideas. This seems to me to be not a problem of English ability or English command, but just a problem of being able to think about an argument for an opinion on the spot without much time in advance. However, there are two important things to remember when it comes to thinking of ideas. The first of those is that the quality of ideas is much more important than the quantity. If you are developing your ideas sufficiently, you shouldn't need many ideas in the first place. Really, you should only need about 2, maximum 3 ideas each. That's not many at all, is it? And once you have found your idea or your ideas, you can then develop them, which is much easier, much simpler, and does not require as much original thought. However, finding ideas is still a little bit difficult for some, so let's look at some ways that we can come up with ideas. Now, finding ideas is something that you can actually do on a daily basis. You can prepare in this regard on a daily basis. IELTS is an essay which aims to challenge you on a variety of topics. As a result, it's impossible to know which topic you'll have to write about. So the solution is to form an opinion on everything, and as I say, you can do this every single day. Let's have a look at an example. Trains, subways. Imagine you're waiting for a train. While you're sitting there, think to yourself, what could be done to make my experience of waiting for this train more enjoyable? What could the transport company or the government do to improve the quality of this public transport? What are the pros and cons of taking the underground versus walking or taking a car? So there's plenty of things that you can think about while you're just sitting and waiting for a train. Then when you get a question in task 2, which asks you to describe the pros and cons of public transport, then you will be completely prepared. You would have thought of some ideas beforehand, totally confident, go in, sit down, put those ideas onto the page, and then you just develop those ideas. We can think of many other scenarios as well. Let's consider these here. So ask yourself questions throughout your day so that you can form ideas and opinions on a wide variety of topics. Let's think about the news, for example. You sit down in the morning, you read the news, it's over your morning coffee. Instead of just sitting there and reading, ask yourself some questions. Are you using the internet right now? Or newspapers themselves? Or television? Why? Why are you choosing this medium over another medium? What are the pros and cons of each of these different formats? What do you think will happen to the news in the future? And how important is the media in creating public opinion? What could be done to prevent media bias? Lots of things we can ask ourselves about the news. What about mobile phones? So it's your lunch break and you're checking your phone during this hour. Instead of just scrolling through Facebook, you can ask yourself some questions. What did you used to do during your lunch break before phones became one of the central focuses of our lives? How have phones become so addictive? How has phone use changed over the last few decades? What could be done to prevent or reduce phone addiction? Why are some people so concerned about having the latest model? A number of different questions we can ask on what appear to be the most mundane of subjects. These are all things that will come up in the exam. Another thing you can do is to read newspapers. Read everything that you can, read a variety of different materials and explore a number of different topics, but newspapers in particular are a great way to learn about the opinions of others on lots of different topics and the arguments they have for those opinions. They're therefore very useful at helping you to think of ideas. Now, there's a great site out there called News in Levels, www.newsinlevels.com, and this is a website which presents English news articles in language which meets 3 different ability levels: beginner, intermediate and advanced, level 1, 2 and 3. I really would recommend you check this out if you haven't heard of it before. It's a really good way of learning typical journalistic language, typical essay writing language, and it will you will find an ability level which suits your current ability. Once you're comfortable at level 3 on News in Levels, you may want to try moving to real newspapers to get an idea for how English is written at a very, very high level. Here are some newspapers which focus on various different topics, so you have the opportunity to think about lots of different things. The Guardian, The Independent, and The Times. I personally read The Guardian. I think it's a great newspaper, but you're free to pick any of those. They're all very, very good, but make sure you check out newsinlevels.com. Really good site when you're trying to learn how to think of ideas. So, thinking of ideas. Hopefully, you'll go away and you'll take the advice here, and as soon as you close down this video, you can start thinking about the internet. Ask yourself some different questions on the internet, and this will help you to think of ideas based on that topic, and continue so forth throughout your week. So, that's thinking of ideas. I'll see you in the next lecture when we'll talk about how to develop those ideas. Hi again, everybody. In the last lecture, we were looking at finding ideas, how to come up with ideas. In this lecture, we're going to take it to the next step, and we're going to think about how to develop those ideas and how to use examples to support and justify these ideas. So all about how we're going to build our answer appropriately. So we need to return to the same thing that we've mentioned a couple of times already during this course. Quality is always more important than quantity. It is much more important to develop one idea fully than to write about lots of ideas without developing any of them. So ideally, you should really only need 2 ideas for your individual body paragraphs, and then you develop those ideas with supporting ideas. Doing so enables us to address key criteria for task achievement, which is Band 7 presents, extends and supports main ideas. If you look at Band 8, this just goes a step further. Presents a well-developed response to the question with relevant, extended and supported ideas. So the greater your development, the higher your score in task response. So, how do we develop ideas? Let's start with returning to the Building Body Paragraphs lecture. There was a good template in there for how to develop a single idea. You've got your topic sentence, support sentence, example sentence, alternative sentence, result sentence. If you can't remember all of that, please go back and watch the Building Body Paragraphs lecture. But how do you come up with each sentence? Well, there's a good trick that we can use, and it's all about asking questions. 3 questions in particular. But these questions are more specific than the questions we asked ourselves to find ideas. The questions we need to ask ourselves if we want to develop ideas are, firstly, why? Why? This is our supporting sentence. Then, what kind? Can we give an example of that? And finally, what if? And this will help us to think of an alternative situation. Let's look at that in practice. So, we have an idea here. We found an idea, and the idea is that the function of a university should be to prepare students for work. Okay, so first of all, why? Well, this is because many professions need employees who are equipped with comprehensive theoretical and practical knowledge, which universities can provide. Yes, we are using quite advanced vocabulary here and quite advanced grammar, but the main idea is not that complicated. Professions need professionals. That's pretty much it. We need to have people who know what they're doing. And then we've just elaborated on it with the language. So that's why the function of a university should be to prepare students for work. Can we give an example? What kind of professions? For example, medical students must be given rigorous lessons on anatomy before they become doctors, so that they can make decisions which save people's lives. So we've given an example of a profession where this type of education is important. And finally, the what if. What if this weren't the function of universities? So, if universities were more concerned with education for its own sake instead, rather than giving students the necessary training to become competent professionals, there would be a serious shortage of doctors, lawyers, and other essential professionals in society. Again, this is advanced grammar, it's advanced vocabulary, there's an advanced sense of cohesion. But the idea is fairly simple. If we didn't have universities that helped people get into work, then we would suffer from a lack of these important professions. Okay? And there's something very much worth noticing. All of this here, 94 words. 94 words for the entire paragraph. Okay, so you want to keep those body paragraphs down to around 90 to 100 words, and that this paragraph has done exactly that. So let's see if you can try it yourself. I want you to think about this idea at the top of the screen. Sending all criminals to prison would be a terrible idea. So I want you to pause the video now, and I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit longer than usual. I would like you to see if you can answer each of these questions, which will help to develop the main idea. Why? Why would sending all criminals to prison be a terrible idea? What kind of criminals shouldn't go to prison? So there's our example. And our alternative situation, what would happen if all criminals went to prison? Why would it be so bad? What would happen if all criminals went to prison? So pause the video here and come back when you've got some ideas of your own, and then we'll have a look at what I have. Okay, so let's have a look at the first question. Why would sending all criminals to prison be a terrible idea? This is because the purpose of prison is to deter and incarcerate criminals, but some types of crime can be deterred with less expensive and more productive measures. Okay, so what kind of criminals shouldn't go to prison? For example, those who commit petty crimes like pickpocketing, shoplifting and speeding would contribute much more to society by undergoing community service or paying a fine. So we've given two examples here, the type of criminal and the type of punishment that they should receive. The last question, what would happen if all criminals went to prison? If, in contrast, every crime was sentenced with prison time, prisons would be full to bursting. Law-abiding citizens would be faced with a huge tax burden, and the criminals themselves would learn nothing about their crimes. Okay, so supporting the main idea with three important questions. Why, what kind, what if? And that is what I want you to do for the rest of this lecture. I want you to use the same technique of why, what kind, and what if to develop the ideas below. Conflict between parents and their children is necessary because it helps the latter to develop. Dropping foreign languages from school curriculums would be unnecessary and short-sighted. One of the main advantages of moving abroad is that it enables people to broaden their horizons. 3 main ideas here, and you can use those 3 questions to see if you can develop these ideas and stay focused on the main idea until you have a very well developed argument. So that's supporting and developing ideas. In the next lecture, we're going to find out how you can create and maintain a position or opinion on a question. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back, everybody. In today's lecture, continuing with the task achievement band descriptor category, we're going to think about how to create and maintain a position or opinion in the response. When and how to express yourself. This is quite a long lecture, so be prepared, but we're going to go in depth regarding when we should be stating our opinion and in which way we should be doing so. First of all, let's remind ourselves of the band descriptors. So, maintaining and stating a position is one of the most important factors for achieving a high band score in this area. So, present a clear position throughout the response is something you must do if you want to achieve band 7. With some tasks, this requirement is fairly simple to meet. With others, it can cause a little bit of difficulty. But remember that we do not need to give an opinion if the task does not ask us to give an opinion. Now, this is the case with discussion essays and most situation essays. Let's first of all think about approaching the task. Consider the following question. Government investment in the arts, such as music and theatre, is a waste of money. Governments must invest this money in public services instead. To what extent do you agree with this statement? So what are the key words here? Hopefully you'll pick out investment in the arts, waste of money, and public services instead. And then you could think about what your opinion is on each of these key words, on each of these different areas of the task. Let's break it down in a little bit more detail. First sentence, government investment in the arts, such as music and theatre, is a waste of money. Do you agree or disagree with this single statement? Let's imagine that you disagree with this. You don't think it's a waste of money. What about governments must invest this money in public services instead? Do you agree or disagree with this? Let's imagine that you partly agree. Notice that you can both agree and disagree and still have a coherent opinion. This is even easier to do in a 2-statement question like the one we are looking at. Notice the 2 statements above rather than 1. Let's have a look at how we would write this opinion in the introduction. Now, stating our opinion in the introduction is important as we need to present a clear position. There's that key word, throughout the response, throughout, so from the beginning. In the lecture Incredibly Quick Introductions, we took a brief look at how we might introduce our opinion to the reader. Here was that formula again. Number 1, general statement. Number 2, paraphrase the task language. And number 3, write an opinion, and if you'd like to, you can also think about writing a plan as well. Here's an example. It is important to consider how government should spend its money. Some believe investing this money in the arts is wasteful, and that all these funds should be diverted to public services. Now, here's the opinion. While I disagree that the arts are a waste of money, I do feel that some of this funding should go to public services. So we're going to focus on this introduction here and take a closer look. 3 things are very clear from this introduction. Number 1, we understand in full what the task opinion is, what the opinion being presented is. Number 2, we are stating a clear view of our own, that we disagree and agree with different parts of the task. And finally, that our view is 100% relevant to every part of the task opinion. We're giving relevant ideas, another key part of the task requirements. Now, how do you put your opinion into the body? Well, this kind of depends on which type of essay we're going for. In opinion and discussion and opinion essays, your opinion must be clear within the body of the essay, and it must be consistent with the opinion in the introduction, so don't change your mind halfway through. For discussion opinion essays, the opinion should come across in this format. Start with the side that you disagree with and use language which makes it clear that it is not your view, like those who believe. In the second body paragraph, this is where you introduce your view and you make it clear that it is your view. However, I would argue. With opinion essays, it's a little bit different. You can just use to begin with and furthermore, because it is just your view that you are giving. So again, we just have a look at the one above. It's that language, those who believe, and I would argue that makes it clear which is our opinion and which is other people's opinion. Whereas down in the opinion essay, unless you explicitly state otherwise, the content of the body of an opinion essay will be deemed to be your own view. Because in your introduction, you would have said, I believe, and you would have carried that on. So you don't really need to use too much personal language like I believe in the body of an opinion essay. Now, let's think about something a little bit more subtle here, which is qualifying your opinion. We'll explain what that means in a moment. Sometimes you will not fully agree or disagree with a statement. Sometimes you will only partly agree or disagree, or be split for and against, pretty much 50-50. In these cases, do not just side with one view because it's easier, except maybe in extreme circumstances where the task would be extremely difficult if you did decide to go in this direction. You need to be developing your English for genuine purposes, not just for IELTS, so it's good to learn language that we can use to help us when we partly agree or partly disagree with something. And this is what qualifying is. So we can use qualifying language, certain phrases and expressions, which we're going to look at here. So, qualifying your opinion, these phrases will do that. It depends on, or it is dependent on. Make an exception for, or the passive, an exception should be made for. Only to an extent, or only up to a point. Only in some cases. Should take into account. Should be taken into account. So expressions like these can help us to qualify our opinions, but they do so in slightly different ways. And here is an exercise that I want us to complete now. I want you to have a look at these sentences here and see if you can use the expressions from the previous slide and put each one into the correct gap on this slide. So you can pause the video here, you can slide backwards in the video to look at those expressions again and see if you can put them into the correct gaps here. And when you're ready, hit the play button and you can continue. Okay, let's see what we have here. So number one, however, I believe the arts should only be funded up to a point or to an extent because there needs to be enough money to support public services. So up to a point basically means like, yes, do it, just don't do it too much. There should be a limit. Up to a point, to an extent. Number two, while it is important for university students to receive financial assistance, I believe their family background should be taken into account. Here, should be taken into account, just should be considered. Take into account equals consider. Number three, although I am mostly against taxing unhealthy foods, I believe an exception should be made for foods which contain artificial preservatives. And then we support that. An exception should be made for, make an exception for, do it differently for a small number of things or a small number of people, just a small number. Number four, I believe the government should offer financial incentives to the public for recycling, but it depends on what is being recycled. So it depends on, sort of on the condition that. It depends on, this is probably the one that you would be most comfortable with and that you've seen many times and used many times in the past. It's still very, very useful for qualifying our opinion. And finally, number 5, the argument for requiring all criminals to undergo community service is one I am in favour of, but only in some cases. So, not all the time, but sometimes. It depends, again, you've got that, it depends on the particular case, on the particular situation. So a lot of these are quite similar to one another, but you do need to be using them at the correct times. Finally, let's think about how we can state our opinion in the conclusion. Now, we do look at how to write a conclusion in the lecture Quick Conclusion, but here are some important points to bear in mind. In discussion opinion essays, make sure you cover the alternate viewpoint and its arguments as well as your own. So you're trying to summarize both viewpoints and their arguments. For example, you can see this here. This is a good template for how you would write a discussion opinion conclusion. In conclusion, although, as, so there's your viewpoint and argument, although viewpoint as argument, I believe this viewpoint because second argument. With opinion essays, you don't really need to look at the alternative viewpoint. You can just look at your own, but do make sure again you're summarizing your supporting argument and make sure your opinion is as clear as possible. So here's a template here. In conclusion, due to this argument and this argument, I believe that this viewpoint. Let's have a look at how that looks filled in. First one, in conclusion, although building accommodation is important as it combats homelessness, I believe we should invest more in green spaces because doing so provides a better quality of life for citizens. So you've got the alternate viewpoint, building accommodation is important, and the argument, it combats homelessness, and then our viewpoint, we should invest more in green spaces, and the argument, because it provides a better quality of life. Now with the opinion essay, due to the importance of individual cultures and the danger of war, those are our two arguments that we would have put in our two body paragraphs. And then the viewpoint, I believe that under no circumstances, nice expressive language here, should minority languages be allowed to perish. Okay, so that's the type of language we want to see in a conclusion. And just to finish up here, I'm going to leave you with some strong opinion language. If you ever want to put across your opinion with a little bit more strength and enthusiasm, you might want to think about using expressions like these, experimenting with expressions like these. So, long lecture today, but hopefully a comprehensive and thorough look at how you can use, create and maintain an opinion in your Task 2 essay. See you in the next lecture. Hello everybody. Now we're coming to the final lecture in this section of the course, so the last lecture on task achievement, task response, and it's a fairly brief one. It's about generalizing and how to stop overgeneralizing. If you don't really know what this means, don't worry, we're going to look at it during the course of the lecture. So, what are generalizations? We're going to look at that straight away. A generalization is a statement about all members of a particular group, which may be true in some or many situations, but not necessarily all situations. So we could have a look at an example here. One reason why teenagers and their parents have poor relationships with one another is that. So have a look at this sentence, see if you can see what might be a little bit strange about it. Well, it's this part here. Teenagers and their parents have poor relationships. Is this true for all parents and teenagers? No, surely not. And even if it were, it would be impossible to verify. So we have to avoid writing language like this in our Task 2 essay. Generalizations can also be made about situations as well as people. So here's another example. When employees feel a strong sense of job satisfaction, company profits rise. Company profits rise. All the time? Does that always result from a strong sense of job satisfaction? It may often be the case, but not always. So we need to make sure to avoid language like this. Now, why is avoiding generalizations important? Let's return to the band descriptors. Task achievement, band 7 states, but there may be a tendency to overgeneralize and or supporting ideas may lack focus. So that tendency to overgeneralize. As you can see, you can actually score a band 7 even with generalizations. But why not avoid the generalizations and shoot for a band 8 instead? At the very least, this is going to give you more room for error in the other band descriptor categories. So how do we avoid overgeneralizing? Well, we need to soften our statements with appropriate language. We're going to look at some expressions now, some words, some phrases, and I want you to think of these as generalizing softeners. So, modal verbs to start with: may, might, could, can. Depending on the context, they can help to soften a generalization. Frequency language: often, tend to, usually, occasionally. And non-specific quantifiers: many, some, a number of, a lot of. Notice it's not most. Try to avoid most, because most is saying more than 50%. And again, can we verify that? Probably not. Most of the time not. So try to use these quantifiers instead. These can all be used to soften the broadness of our statements. So we're going to look at an example, and I want you to try and soften this example using these words above. Politicians are influenced by the media, which is a problem because this has a negative effect on social equality in the country. So, how could we soften this statement? Many politicians are influenced by the media, which is often a problem because this can have a negative effect on social equality in the country. So by using a few of these expressions, we have avoided making grand sweeping statements about something which we cannot verify. Try to experiment with using some of these in your next essay. Try not to use too many softeners. You don't want to go overboard, but do try and notice where you're writing a sentence which is a little bit too general, is a little bit too sweeping and confident. You may need to reel it back in by using one of these generalizing softeners. Right, so that brings us to a close on task achievement. In the next section, we're going to be talking about vocabulary.